Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cyndy's Friday Forums. My name is Cyndy McDonald. I'm an educator, I'm an entrepreneur, and now I'm a producer, something I never thought I would be doing, but here I am 3 years later and offering these Friday Forum shows for you so that you can hear from experts in the areas of working with students and families and business and all those things that we do as educators and also as professionals in our profession. So as you're joining me today, go ahead and put your name and your location in so that my guests and everybody can see where you're from. And as you're doing that, our topic for today is demonstrated interest. What is it and what makes demonstrated interest? And I have three esteemed guests joining me. We have Lauren Sefton from Rhodes University, or Rhodes College. It's not a university, is that right? No. Okay. And we have Christine Bowman from Southwestern and also Jen from the College of Wooster. Did I get that right? And they're going to introduce themselves in more detail. But we also want to know, in terms of this topic, and Carmen, my right-hand person, has put this in the chat. So what's the most unique way a student has shown demonstrated interest? I find these stories very fascinating, as this is something we talk about with our students, parents ask us about, and they're always looking for that secret thing to do. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. And all of Lauren and Christine and Jen all represent colleges that change lives. They're part of the CTCL organization, a group of around 40 colleges that are liberal arts schools that have demonstrated the impact that they can make in a student's lives, not only just during college, but for the rest of their lives. And many of us are fans of CTCL. I am a big fan of CTCL, so I'm just really glad to have you all here with me today. So as we're getting started, you can see we've got people from all over. Marcia's joined us from Brazil. I know, Monica joins us. I know it's like 8 o'clock, in the night, or 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't know what time it is for you, Monica, but we're glad to have you here from Switzerland. So I'd like to start and have you each introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about your background and your role at the college or university you work with. So Lauren, let's start with you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lauren Sefton. I am Director of International Admission at Rhodes, and I am celebrating my 20th year of working in the admission office at Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee. And I have worked with domestic students as well as international students, and I still currently have a territory in the U.S. As well.
Christine?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christine Bowman. I am the Assistant Vice President for Admission at Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas. This is the start of my 30th year in college admission, and I am really excited to work with students from New Mexico and students from some pockets of schools in the Houston and Dallas area, but mostly getting to work with families and help them get through the process, hopefully in the most stress-free way possible.
I love that. I love that. That's all of our goal is that reducing that stress and focusing on the journey and some of the opportunities. Jen, how about for you?
Great. Thanks so much. I'm Jen Winge. I'm the Vice President for Enrollment at the College of Wooster, located in Wooster, Ohio, which is just an hour south of Cleveland and an hour and a half north of the city of Columbus. And this is my 27th year. So Christine, you have me beat just by a couple of years. I do have a small stint away on the other side of the desk working at the Kiski School outside of Pittsburgh as a college counselor and educator. But I will say that this is my sweet spot, working in enrollment and being on a liberal arts and sciences campus. And in fact, at 4 o'clock today, I'm meeting with one of our professors, and her son to talk about his college search. So our work extends to many different audiences.
That's how nice. How nice. That sounds exciting. So as we're talking and starting the new school year, we're looking at, and we as counselors, advisors are talking with our students. And the question that comes up all the time is, how do I show demonstrated interest? But we need to know what demonstrated interest is. Is there a definition that we can look at or consider?
So I think demonstrated interest has really started to kind of take on an interesting label and identity. Obviously, by its natural definition, demonstrated interest is a way a student can engage with a college to express interest in that school. But I want to remind us that it's also an opportunity for demonstrated learning. I think that instead of looking at demonstrated interest as a tool to game the system, I hope that we will empower our students and families to look at demonstrated interest as a tool to make sure this is absolutely the right fit of a school for the student. Now, that's not to say that demonstrated interest can't play an important role. We all have larger application pools than we can fully admit or welcome to our communities every year. And so it is helpful when a student has kind of raised their hand and said, I like you. I would like to get to know you better. And maybe that will help them in the journey help us in the journey to be able to say, if I only have a few slots left, I'm going to look at who has shown some interest in my school to be able to consider making a match along the way. But I think that there is a balance in demonstrated interest that we'll talk about as we kind of have this conversation today. I also think that it is a part of the enrollment funnel, and demonstrated interest can play different roles as the funnel begins to be more narrow. When you're a prospect or an inquiry at the top of the funnel and you're one of 100,000 names in a college database, showing demonstrated interest may come in one form. And when you're getting down to after you've been admitted or, at the time of application, demonstrated interest can show itself in a different form. And we're going to talk a little about that. So I don't want to give those opportunities away. If you're interested in learning how demonstrated interest is playing a role amongst us as colleges, just yesterday, literally hot off of the press, NACAC released its updated State of College Admission Report, and this section focused on the factors that go into college admission decisions. And I think that it was really helpful as we were preparing for our conversations to see this pop up and to see that demonstrated interest has really kind of been flat in its priority of position. While it is a top 5 factor in schools using it as a tool, it is not even close to the things that I think we always consider to be most important. What is the student's academic coursework like? How have they performed in that academic coursework? Have they taken rigorous coursework as provided by their institutions or in their areas of interest? And the essay, and then demonstrated interest kind of comes in number 5 as far as one of the factors that institutions are considering. And so I think as we're setting up our conversation and the definition of, raising my hand and showing that I like you, a little bit of getting my name on your dance card, it's important to remember that this isn't the end-all be-all factor. It's important to remember that some schools are going to place greater emphasis on this, and some schools are not going to place any emphasis on this at all. And so I hope that we, instead of obsessing about how do we show interest, we flip it around for our students to say, how do we use demonstrated interest for demonstrated learning about an institution to find the right fit?
I love that. And I think that's one of the messages that we can carry as counselors to our parents is to flip that into, how do you find that demonstrated learning and learn about the institution? And we're always talking about fit, but finding a way to really define it and create a way to capture that. So is this something that's controlled by NACAC? This report just came out, or we talk about the common data set, it shows up as a factor on that. Is this controlled by these organizations, or how does that work?
That's a great question, Cyndy. So demonstrated interest is not controlled by anybody, but frankly, the student, right? The applicant has the control in this process of whether or not and how they might demonstrate that level of engagement with colleges or universities. But NACAC has provided a lot of great definitions about what demonstrated interest may be. And so they can help set that framework of what is it. And then it does get pulled into the common data set. So for those of you who are not familiar with the common data set, the link is in the chat, but it is basically a collaboration between colleges and universities and publishers that we're all following, College Board, U.S. News and World Report, Peterson's. They've all joined together to say, we want to be able to provide data that is clean and consistent between colleges and universities. And so it really is a collaborative goal. And there's lots of basic information about enrollment numbers and majors and very specific statistics and number-driven criteria, but there's also some things that are a little bit more subjective. And so if you're really diving deep into this data set, it's section C7, by the way, where colleges and universities can describe a relative importance of various criteria in the college admission process. And they can rank it on a scale of very important, considered, not considered. And so one of those things, and again, all sorts of academic features, but also non-academic features like an interview or extracurricular activities or a residency requirement for a particular state, and level of applicants' interest is one of those factors. So you can have your students go in and search all of their schools and see where these criteria fall, if they're very important, if they're considered, or if they're just not considered at all. And you'll notice that a lot of those ultra competitive schools, what our executive director of Colleges That Changed Lives, Amarano, likes to call the sweatshirt schools, don't consider demonstrated interest at all in that process. And so they'll give you some true data straight from the college or university about whether this is something that is factored in. For sure. So that can be a great resource for your students if you want to have them do some homework beyond just looking at the college's website. But common data set doesn't control whether or not, doesn't influence whether or not a college or university factors in that demonstrated interest or level of interest. It merely reports back what the university says that they factor into their decisions.
I think that's an important distinction for us to have, and it also is important to understand the role that NACAC and the common data set follow in that. They're just following the admissions process itself. And just for those who don't know, NACAC is the National Association for College Admissions Professionals. You're on mute, Christine.
National Association of College Admission Counseling.
That's it. That's what this is. So and it's it's the general organization that colleges, counselors, nonprofit groups, anybody who's involved in this process can belong to. And I would recommend look at the Common Data Set website, because it tells you what the questions are that are asked. And as part of that whole publisher approach and creating that uniformity and consistency, so you're always comparing apples to apples, the questions are often in there. So I think sometimes we wonder, well, why was this question or that question not asked? Well, that goes back to the common data set. So I find it a very valuable thing. So how do each of your universities, you're looking for particular kinds of students. How do those institutional perspectives shape the use or the value of demonstrated interest on your campus?
I think that's a valuable question, because clearly, institutional perspectives are mission-based. I mean, we want them to be mission-based. We want to always look back at our core values and our mission in terms of how we do our work in admissions. That is, I think, what we all strive to do. I will say that a little bit of the pressure is also that some institutions may place on their admissions offices as they consider the different attributes of the application process when making decisions may also be driven by the reporting. So the percentage of admit rate, right? That admit rate, and whether they want to control that a little bit more, being able to have a stronger yield rate, the number of students that are admitted that choose that institution. So there is that pressure that can happen at some institutions, or that goal that they have that may place a little bit more emphasis on demonstrated interest, because they obviously want to be a little more selective with their offers of admission based on a student's level of interest. But I would like to be the optimist and say that most of us make the decision to use demonstrated interest at some level because it aligns with how we approach education, how we approach this process in a holistic way. It provides an opportunity, as Christine said, to make a connection, have meaningful conversations, help the student know that it may or may not be the right match for them. So I do think it depends on the institution. And historically, before we had all the technology, it did help as the Common App became so popular and other universal apps became popular to help look through the noise for the students that were most interested. Now with the technology that we have, and that's something I'd like to transition to, is you can do a lot to track students' activity and engagement. It just depends on the institution how much they want to utilize that and actually have it impact their decisions.
So that becomes the next question, right? And that's the question often that we as counselors or parents might have is, how is technology used, and what does that look like? So
Sure.
Explain a little bit more about what that is and
right. So the majority of the institutions that are out there have some type of communication management system, some type of platform that allow us to gather information, details about a student, but then obviously interact with them in meaningful ways, whether that's information that we're sending out to them, but also how they're engaging or interfacing with that communication. And one of the most popular platforms that I know many of you are familiar with is through a company called Technolutions, and it's a platform called Slate. And so I believe that the three schools that are on this call today are Slate clients. And it has been a game changer for us in terms of how we work as a team and how we communicate with students, but also how we review applications. So it has been a wonderful tool, but it probably has shaped how we assess and how we review demonstrated interest. So I thought, it would be nice for you to see an example of what that will look like when we do look at a student record. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you're able to see this. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
And so this is just an example of the dashboard of a student. Now, of course, above at the top would be the student's name and their address and contact information, but we've taken that out, obviously. But this gives you just a general view of some of the touch points and ways that we've interacted with a student, but also maybe, some general demographic information that would be helpful for us. This is a custom, there are some default fields and ways this is designed for every school, but it also is customized. Schools can decide what they may or may not want on this, but this is just an example of how we can track a student's engagement with us. So as you can see here, this is an example of a Wooster record where at the top, I can see if a student is planning to have any type of engagement with us, either online or in person. I also, obviously know if there has been a decision made on their application and which round they're in, if they're early decision, regular decision. There are interactions. These are ways that we connect typically with the student. We're sending out information to invite them to engage in different ways. And then, as you can see on the far right, we have an opportunity to understand how they moved through that funnel that Christine was talking about. When did they first when did we start communicating with the student? And here at the top right corner, you see that they were a prospect within 3 years before that they were graduating from high school. This was a 2021 record. And then they became an inquiry, which meant they did raise their hand and say, oh, I'm interested in Wooster, about a year later. And then, of course, it took some time, but they finally, in their fall of their senior year, when the application became available, very soon after, they did apply to Wooster. So it gives us an idea of that evolution of the student, where they did enter our system. And then I know a lot of folks are interested in that, what is like a heat map, that activity history and timeline that you see. I actually don't use this as often, but I do know some schools really like to sort of hone in on that senior year and to see how students are engaging. But as you can see, we're tracking all different types of touch points, both what we're doing to interact and to engage, and then also how the student is reacting to that. So you can see that we really started to provide a lot of emails in that green into the junior year. And then the students started to engage with us by clicking on those emails and reacting to those emails, closer into that spring of the junior year and into the senior year. So schools are potentially using this to see the number of clicks, the number of times a student engages, and then, of course, obvious demonstrated interest of attending events, registering for events, and whether they're following through with those. So I'll stop there. I'm sure others may want to jump in with how they use Slate or the technology in general, and I'm happy to click to the next screen for a different view.
I think this is interesting to see. Not only, I love the heat map and the fact that you can look at it and see it's not just a matter of sending the emails, but did they react? Are they being, responded to? And she didn't answer all the emails, but she did click on, you can see which one she clicked on. So I think that's very valuable to information. As a person who founded a technology in our industry, I'm surprised it took so long for Slate to come on to you would expect the colleges to have had it before we did, and yet it was really pretty, I think, the other way around. So tell us what this one shows.
Yeah, so this is just a similar screen in Slate, but for Rhodes. So you can see it can feel quite familiar, or there's some similar things. This was a student, actually one of my favorites now that I think about it. I was probably supposed to use a test subject, but instead I used one of my favorites. He's from North Carolina. And the student's name was Joey. And you can see, similarly, we had an interaction early on. He was a prospect back in 2020, and then he came to an event that we had in early 2021, and then was kind of radio silent, honestly, you can tell, for a pretty significant amount of time until it became time to actually apply. And we also share kind of where the student is in the reading process once they've applied. And he was obviously a really strong student and ended up being one of our top scholars. But you can see that he's attended events, he's visited campus as well. And it's so funny. I think that activity history, that heat map, is fun to look at because it's colorful. But I'll be honest, I don't think I even realized it was down there until we were preparing for this presentation. And Jen mentioned it, and I was like, oh, we have that. So it's not something, I think, that at least in our office that we look at as a visual aid very often, because usually by the time we're in it, we know these students or we don't. But whether or not they've followed along is kind of a different story. But it is a very nice visual representation. And in this case, the student had a lot of really serious interactions in a relatively short amount of time that really started once he applied, more than anything else. But the nice thing, I think, for us in terms of thinking about demonstrating engagement is he applied with little engagement prior to that, but once he applied, he seriously invested his time and energy into Rhodes, and into learning Rhodes and making and showing and demonstrating that he actually very much knew what kind of school he was applying to. So stealth applicant, but then very engaged applicant as soon as he hit the submit button. So not a total stealth applicant in that we had no idea who he was throughout the process.
So Lauren, and both you guys showed, as you share this, you can see that students are moving through a funnel, and you have 3 categories, Jen, that you represent on that other screen. This one has 2. Are there other categories, or how is your definitions? Do they go from prospect? Is there something in between prospect and applicant, or are those just those 2 categories?
That's a good question. I do think that we have offices use different nomenclature and have emphasis on different parts of the funnel. So for Wooster, we define the prospect as someone who we are reaching out to first before they may even know about us, right? These are students that we acquire through the College Board, through ACT, through potentially third-party sites like Niche, I say niche, but Niche, and CapEx. And they haven't yet said or added Wooster to their list in any profile or any formal way, but they match the type of student that we're looking for in terms of their interests, their engagement, or self-reported grades. And so we are actively engaging with these folks, at least initially, pretty heavily until a certain point where we realize, okay, they're not responding to us in any meaningful way, and so we may really decrease or minimize the amount of time and effort that we put into that work. And then once a student does raise their hand, and that, of course, can also have a different definition. Some schools really want a student to complete a form in its completion and send in a request for information form, or to go to a landing page where they're actually submitting something. Whereas I've learned that there are schools that if you click on an email or maybe click on more than one email, they'll move you to that inquiry phase. So it really depends on the school and what their goals are and what they define as engagement, meaningful engagement. And then at that inquiry phase, we're going to spend a little bit more time interacting and engaging and providing, I think, variable content and meaningful content for that student. And then, of course, at the applicant phase, then they'll start to move through the decision process. So they'll move to admit and eventually into a deposit, where we obviously have a whole line of communication that way.
I think that's something that's important to understand and realize, is that that process of that perspective is unique, just like it is for our students. It's unique to each one of our institutions. Mm-hmm. So Christine, what about for you and your experience? And I know you've been involved with the CTCL schools in general in terms of this. So what would you add to that?
I think that each school, as Jen said, defines it in different ways. I think the other thing that has really changed, and it almost gets back to the question that I just answered in the chat from Kate Ryan. I was doing some research in preparing for a different conversation this week, and I looked back to see what our main first source of applications is. And our largest first source of applications is not the names that we buy from the College Board or ACT, not names that we get from our coaches, but it is students who send us their application. That is the first time we ever learn about them. And I think, and getting back to Kate's question, do I appreciate demonstrated interest after a student applies? Yes, because if that's where the majority of the students are first raising their hand to get on my dance card, I want them to engage with me when they are ready. But I do believe also that demonstrated learning continues as part of that journey. I've said for years, I don't believe that a student wakes up, throws spaghetti against a wall and says, that piece stuck around Wooster, Ohio. I think I'm going to apply to that college today. They have to know something about our schools. We just haven't, connected with them in quite the same way. So whether it's at the prospect phase and they're a ninth grader and they come to a college fair and they're a long way away from ever applying, but we get their name at that point in time. And maybe, as we saw on that heat map, we're sending them mail. They're not necessarily clicking on anything or engaging, but they may be reading it. They may be looking at it. They're slowly getting that information and building their knowledge base. Sometimes that knowledge base will teach them, I'm going in a different direction. These are too small. I want big. I want a very technical major. All of that demonstrated learning by engaging is still beneficial for the student. And if they unsubscribe in the junior year because they're really honed in and no longer think that a small liberal arts college or the big state school is the right match for them, we have all succeeded. That way, Jen and Lauren don't have to continue to send that student hundreds and hundreds of pieces or emails or invite them to events because that student's no longer interested. And that student has progressed in their journey to the point to say, I'm honing in on what I want. There are 4,000 colleges across the country. They don't all fit me. And as I've read and I've taught myself and I've learned, this is now where I am. And so demonstrated interest is going to be a part of the process for students when they are ready and when they discover what they need. Sometimes we as parents or as counselors may drag them to that demonstrated interest point by strongly encouraging them to do something, to raise their hand. And others are going to, as Kate implies, demonstrate their interest after they've hit that application phase. We'll take it when we can get it, because that means that that's when the learning is really happening. And it's okay that it happens in different spaces, whether that's the prospect and inquiry phase or whether that is the applicant and the admitted student phase. I mean, for some students, they're really not choosing to engage until they've been admitted. I can't fly from Seattle to Texas to come do a visit until I've been admitted. Now, I think we all know there's more than just a campus visit as a mechanism to demonstrate interest, and we'll hit on that. But demonstrated interest is appreciated when the student is ready to learn and grow.
Well, and we bring up some very good points that I want to come back to. The example of having students interacting and clicking on websites and not continuing that. If they're not interested, it's a waste of everybody's resources and energy to continue trying to, just throw darts at them. But on the other hand, you can also see that, okay, they keep going to the study abroad page, over and over again. They must be interested in this aspect or this particular institute that our institution has. And then you can target messages based on that to say, oh, you're in, and I mean, we all see this, we see it in other things that we do online. It makes sense to do that from a higher education, from a college institution, so that you can narrow down and hone in on, okay, they're showing this interest. We're really going to personalize it. I don't want to see purses if I'm looking at, shoes or sandals or something, so is that an aspect of what you look at in order to really personalize it? And it's all about building a relationship. And so is that a part of anything that you do with your students, or your technology?
It is a part of what we do in terms of our communication plans and flows and connecting with students. It is not a part of what we would factor in demonstrated interest in admission decisions. So we're not looking at how many times you click on a website or how many times you've opened an email to then influence an admission decision. But we are very much looking at, you've clicked on study abroad, you've spent X number of minutes. I bet you're interested in study abroad. Let me share a recent story with you about a current student or a recent opportunity or a scholarship opportunity, and make those connections for sure.
So that opens up, then let's talk about what does go into, what counts as demonstrated interest and how that weighs into it.
We're all looking at each other like, okay, who's going to go? I'll throw out a few and then everybody can sprinkle some extra sunshine on top. I mean, I think one of the most common sense ways to demonstrate interest is to visit the campus. The chance to really try on being a college student for a day, talking to current students, sitting in on a classroom, eating in the dining hall. I mean, that's significant. And I come at it from the mindset again of demonstrated engagement or fit. Because if we're going to truly be able to sense whether this is the right place for me, that is one of the best ways to do it. But as you can see on that heat map, it also can be opening every email we send you, coming to a program in the city where you live. I am interested in Rhodes, but I live in Texas. But if Lauren comes and does a presentation in the Austin area, I could go to that presentation and learn about Rhodes without ever having to travel to Memphis. And for students who, are not necessarily naturally inclined to be able to travel all over the country in their junior and senior year visiting colleges, taking advantages of when we're in your space is probably one of the easiest ways and most economical ways to demonstrate interest. Ladies, what would you add?
Well, when I speak with students about this topic, or I'm at high schools and I'm, talking about the college search, I talk about demonstrated interest to be similar to online dating. That you start initially online, right? You can swipe left, swipe right. You can do your own stealth research. You can look at reviews. You can check out videos and pictures on different social media sites. And so that, I suggest, follow certain colleges on their social media accounts, click on particular parts of their website and continue to track. But when the time is right, you'll sign up and do a virtual info session. We learned in the pandemic that those virtual engagement opportunities can be really powerful. A chance to talk with current students, in Ohio at the College of Wooster, when you're in California and you can't make it anytime soon. So having that opportunity to do that earlier in the process is really powerful virtually. And then, of course, when the time is right, obviously connecting in person. And I love, Christine's example of we're in your region and we're, trying to make that connection through an interview, a college fair. Those are still very important touch points for us. And so we hope that you'll take advantage of those too. And then when you can make that visit, that obviously is the best way to engage and interact with us.
Lauren.
I definitely think we've seen a shift in how students are choosing to engage, right? And we can all imagine what that looks like pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and now. But I think students are, at least we're seeing students are not signing up for as many interview interactions on the road when we're traveling and we're in a city. We always try to offer interviews and individual meetings, and students are not as excited about sitting down one-on-one with an admission counselor necessarily. Virtual interviews as well. Some of that high touch level of engagement that smaller schools like ours really specialize in, because that's the kind of learning experience you're going to have on campus as a current student. I think our students need to kind of warm up to some of those ideas, especially at the high school level. So it'll be interesting to see how that shifts over time in the next couple of years. But even the way we have looked at demonstrated interest and the way it's factored into our admission decisions at Rhodes has changed. And I don't know if I'm jumping the gun on where we are in the agenda, but I'm going to do it anyway.
So keep going. You're just keep going. We've already gone through all of it.
So before the pandemic, many of you might remember Rhodes had a very, very transparent and strong I've lost my words now, but very strong stance on demonstrated interest. And so we would, in the reading process, review all the admission decisions, make all the recommendations without demonstrated interest. And then we would layer that on top of it and say, okay, here's a subset of students that we think are amazing and would be terrific fits for Rhodes, and in some case are scholarship students and just, again, amazing contributors to the community, but they have not engaged with Rhodes at all. And by that point, it was a meaningful engagement. College fair, high school visit, virtual interview, in-person interview, campus visit, engagement with an athletics coach, something that was a meaningful interaction, not just opening one or two emails, but an actual interaction that we could point to. And so we would send our decision letter was very transparent and would say, we think you're amazing. We just don't think you're interested in Rhodes. If we've misunderstood, here's the name and contact information of your admission counselor. Reach out by this date. And for early action, we would defer to regular decision. For regular decision, we go to the wait list. But for those students that received that no interest letter, if they reached out truly in any way, then for early action, we would then admit in regular decision. For regular decision, if there was room, we would pull off the wait list. And so total control was back on the student's hand. And sometimes students would come back and say, what do you mean? I've been on campus 3 times. My best friend goes there and my cousin goes there. Well, you never actually stopped to tell us that you had visited. That's different, right? Like just raise your hand. Perfect. Okay. We'll fix that right away. Welcome to the community. We hope you decide to join. So it was super easy at that point for students to then say, nope, you really have misunderstood. We did this to help, let's be honest, protect our admit rates because we are a business. So we're protecting our admit rates. But from a counseling perspective, what it did was allow us to go a lot more deeply into our applicant pool to students that would also be incredible fits for Rhodes who we knew were interested in the school. And I want to give you the perspective that just before the pandemic, I remember one year we deferred 181 students from early action to regular decision based on lack of demonstrated interest. Out of that 181, only 11 came back and said, no, I'm still interested. Oh. So that helped protect a huge portion of students that we were able to then go more deeply into that applicant pool. During the pandemic, there was enough going on in everybody's lives. We said, we're not touching this. We'll just move on. But we started looking at using financial aid forms as a way to see if students were interested. So if you remember from that screenshot that Jen shared that was on our slate, one of the bins was missing financial aid forms. So for students who said, yes, I'm applying for aid, but despite several reminders, we hadn't received a FAFSA from them yet, their decision letter was, you've indicated you're interested in financial aid. We want to be able to provide a financial aid package with an acceptance letter. Please submit those financial aid forms or click this button if you're no longer interested in financial aid. And again, as soon as their FAFSA came through, we could process an admit decision in a financial aid form, but it allowed us to, again, gauge whether students were interested or not. So there's some different ways that schools are trying to explore this, and it looks different now than it maybe did 5 years ago or 4 years ago. And Rhodes is one of those where we are still looking at interest, but it's not going to be the same. We've always been super transparent about it, but the ways we've been doing it are different between COVID.
I think that's really important for us as counselors to understand, and I really appreciate you sharing that behind the scenes, Lauren, because so often, and I see this in my UCLA classes, people come at this going, oh, well, my students deserve to get admitted to every place that they applied to. But it's a two-way road. And you need to demonstrate that you're putting something into this relationship. It's not just a one-way street. It's not a matter of, do you deserve to be admitted or not? It's a matter of, are we going to be, going back to what you were saying, Christine, of, it's a demonstrated learning. I want to learn about you, because not all colleges are going to be a good fit, and you shouldn't have this target. And sometimes parents give us you have this perspective, well, the more applications I put out there, the better off I'm going to be, but that's not the case. So starting that conversation and understanding that it's not a matter of whether you deserve to be admitted or not. That's not the factor at all. It's having that, starting that relationship. So I think that's really key. Christine or Jen, what would you add to that?
Just want to make sure, especially as we have faced change with the Supreme Court decision this year, if you are working with families, and again, this gets back a little bit to, well, it's the opposite end of Kate's question that she threw into the chat. But if you are working with families for whom resources may be limited and going and visiting 20 colleges is not an option, there are ways that students can demonstrate interest that do not cost a penny and can still expect to show that engagement. If a student emails their admission counselor or responds to something that we send, I think now we have to appreciate that that is expressing some interest. If they are doing an online info session, like Jen said, going to a college fair, going to a presentation in a local area, meeting an admission counselor at a local Starbucks, and maybe it's not in a formal interview setting, but more of a one-on-one conversation, just say, we have some questions. Let me go over my financial aid award with you. Or I'm trying to ascertain, am I the right fit? I want to demystify that cost and only being on campus is the way to do it. If there's one thing that the pandemic did teach us, is that there's more ways to actually engage and demonstrate interest along the way. And so I want to ask all of you to be our voice and carry that information outside of this conversation, that if you really are in love with a school, you kind of have to tell us, because then we can be that champion for a student. And in Lauren's case, she might say, hey, Jen, it's fantastic that you're interested in Southwestern, but you haven't had a chance to fill out your FAFSA yet, or we haven't had it. And that is going to be a helpful tool for you to understand how you can afford to attend Southwestern or Rhodes. Part of the demonstrated interest can help us open doors to make sure they're getting a full package of fit, not just an admission decision, but how is this whole thing going to come together to work? It's great if you want to be on my dance card, but if you don't have a good concept of how you're going to afford to pay a $70,000 a year education, we got a lot of learning to do together. And so I think that these are opportunities all the way through the journey to make sure that especially our under-resourced students have the opportunity to understand these colleagues that are on the screen today are here to help them and here to be, and their staffs are here to help them get all the information they need to get their right fit school. And it might take a little nudging, sending that email is a new tool for some of our 17 and 18-year-old students, or quite honestly, picking up the phone and calling the office is a really big skill. But in this day and age, if I got a text, I'd be super happy. I mean, let's call it like it is, friends. And so we have different means to be able to support all of our students. And I don't want students to feel like the only way that they can do it is by a visit, which they can't do because their parents work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and it's super expensive to get to my city versus your city. There's lots of different ways that are very affordable for students to manage that.
Right. Jen?
She took my thunder with the phone call. I find that's one of the most distinctive ways for students to stand out is to pick up the phone, because it is so rare that they do that. And yes, making sure that it's the student calling and not the family member calling whenever possible. So those are really meaningful ways to make that connection, and then to help them understand there's a human on the other side of this process to support them.
Yeah. Okay, that is so funny, because I feel like my staff are like, really, you want to call me? Just text me. This is they don't want to. My staff doesn't want to talk on the phone either. They would much rather just text back and forth,
right?
That's very true. We do. I am a different generation of the rest of my staff, so that's a good point.
But I will say, I think one of the things, I mean, and this is not how you game the system. It's just and schools that have much, much larger applicant pools are not able to do this. But for the schools that have again, a very high touch process. I think it is so much more personally rewarding to be able to read an application of a student that I already feel like I know. It is just really a treat when you pick up an application or you load the application in on Slate and you're like, oh, I remember sitting down with this student at that coffee shop and we talked about X, Y, and Z. Or I remember meeting the student at a college fair or in that virtual Zoom meeting where they had that really cool artwork behind their bed when they were doing their info or their interview. I mean, it's just, there's something about having that connection already before you start reading the file that helps bring the student to life. That is not gaming the system at all. I just always think it's nice when an admission counselor has a smile on their face or a positive memory associated when you pull up a file along the way. And it is not possible for everybody, and we're not going to remember every single student that we engage with on the road. But it is really rewarding when you are able to build those meaningful interactions from start to finish.
And it's meaningful on both sides. You know, the students remember that and respond to that. And then that's their first introduction to the campus and that community. Oh, I can feel this, or I can have that. You know, just the contrast that I was on the phone yesterday with one of my students who's going to a community college here in California. We couldn't even get her an appointment for an online Zoom call to get her classes registered. I have no idea. I mean, I was having as much problem as she was. So I don't know how she's going to get connected. We couldn't call because there's nobody answering the phone. So having that personal connection can make such a difference, such a difference. Carmen, do you have a question or something you want to
We do.
here?
It looks like Christine is answering it. You guys are awesome. Just a bit off topic, Southwestern doesn't accept other category of recommender on the Common App. Is there a way for a student to send along an internship recommendation after the application, or is Southwestern not interested in that?
And I'm answering Holly, but I'm happy to share broadly. We do require a school recommendation from a counselor, teacher, sponsor, principal. We want someone to speak on their behalf in the academic setting, but we do love other individuals. It could be a clergy person, it could be a work person. In this suggestion, Holly recommended an internship sponsor as a supplement to the application. So Holly, thank you very much for asking, and we would welcome that additional voice on top of the school recommendation that is required.
So would they send that in just as a separate email, Christine, rather, because they can't really attach it to the Common App?
Yeah, there's two ways that they could actually send it in. The student could send it to their admission counselor or send it directly to admission@southwestern.edu. If the recommender also shared that document with the student itself, they could upload it through their Slate portal once they had applied, and it would be attached to their application.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Thank you so much. And there's so much more we could talk about, and perhaps we'll get a chance to come back. We just barely touched on the whole race and admissions and how that factors into this. So we'll save that for another time. Looks like we have a question. Maybe we can touch on this about legacy admissions. I know that's a big area that's going to come under fire, if it hasn't already, very, very soon. So do they show more demonstrated interest? Ruka asked about that. So
I love that question. As I'd imagine they are more likely to show demonstrated interest. Usually the legacies do not want to be associated, or they don't want us to know that, oh my gosh, my mom or my my grandfather, they're coming with me to the visit program. Please don't make a big deal about it. So it's really interesting to see that dynamic between the family members who may or may not be as engaged or involved in the process with the actual student. So that's been a lot of my experience. But yes, legacy admission is such a hot topic right now. Again, it depends on the institution. I actually had a conversation with our new president about this literally the day before the common application was going live. So I had already signed off and checked the box. And we do ask about students and whether they have any family members who have attended the College of Wooster. But this year, because of the SCOTUS rulings and what happened nearly a day after they came out, we did decide to put a little bit more context under that question and said, look, we have good relationships with our alumni. We like to stay engaged with them, but this question is really more about that research and that collection of that data. It has nothing to do, it has no bearing on the admission decision or scholarship eligibility. Then the day later, when our new president said, I don't want you to ask that question at all. I'm like, well, too late for now. we're gonna continue to collect it. So I do think it's a hot topic that we're all grappling with, whether we really actually have used legacy historically or not. At Wooster, we did not. It did not make a difference in that decision. It just helped us make a connection, whether the student liked that we did or not, when they visited campus. But maybe others have a different perspective on that.
Any other thoughts?
I find that a lot of our legacies get drugged to campus at homecoming and events that have nothing to do with their college search, so they have a unique perspective on it. I love to welcome our legacy students by telling them that while I value that their parents chose to attend Southwestern, this is their college search and this is their college experience. And our goal with them is to help them see what Southwestern would be like for them. And I often kind of even do a hand gesture to their parents to say, back up the bus just a little bit and let them fly and discover. I, like Jen, value the question. And the reason why I value it is because it allows me to know, do I have a 5th generation legacy family from the University of Texas that now I'm having to help understand the liberal arts? Or if I see, this family went to Rhodes, I don't have to pitch the liberal arts in the same way. They understand the concept. And so I think, again, we have to separate demonstrated learning from gaming the system. I hope the legacy kids will come and learn about their parents' alma mater to see if it's the right fit for them.
I love that. And, it's like so many other things. And, our hearts go out to you guys in the admissions world, because so much of what you do sometimes gets misinterpreted or misconstrued. And, the value of that legacy falls back into all those different aspects for sure. Thank you again, all of you, for joining me today and taking your time. I know many of you, your campuses, students just got back to campus and it's a very busy time. So we really appreciate your time. And thank you to everyone that's here today. Thank you, Carmen, for keeping us straight, and have a great weekend. Okay.
Thanks, Cyndy. Thanks, everyone.